Good day, everyone. Today I'm going to present a case of an ethical research study, the Willowbrook State School Hepatitis Experiment. So in this presentation, I'll first discuss the background of the research study, its objectives, then the key issues of the study, and the violations of the study to each research principle. The case, mentally retarded children housed at the Willowbrook State School in Staten Island, New York, were intentionally given hepatitis in an attempt to track the development of the viral infection. The study began in 1956 and lasted for 14 years. The Willowbrook State School opened in 1947. However, by the 1950s, Willowbrook was overcrowded and had poor living conditions, which contributed to the spread of diseases, including hepatitis. In 1972, the horrific conditions at Willowbrook were brought to national attention by the journalist Geraldo Rivera, who conducted an undercover investigation into the institution. His report was broadcasted on a national TV and it shocked the public, leading to widespread outrage, and later on caused the closure of the Willowbrook. So the interest of the study is on the disease hepatitis. So this refers to the inflammation of the liver, which viral infections, toxins, medications, alcohol, or autoimmune diseases can cause. So the lead researcher is Dr. Saul Krugman, a prominent researcher interested in understanding the transmission and prevention of hepatitis. So the participants involved approximately 700 children, most of whom had severe intellectual disabilities. So the objectives of the study is first to gain a detailed understanding of how hepatitis progresses in the human body, particularly in children with intellectual disabilities. Second is to differentiate between various strains of the hepatitis virus, primarily hepatitis A and hepatitis B, and understand how each strain affects the body differently. Third is to develop and evaluate the effectiveness of experimental vaccines against hepatitis with the goal of preventing the diseases or mitigating its severity. So there are several key issues in this study. First is an issue on informed consent. So there's an issue of coercion. So parents were often coerced into consenting to their children's participation in the study. They were told that enrollment in the experiment was a condition for their child's admission to the overcrowded Willowbrook State School. There's a lack of full disclosure. The information provided to parents were incomplete or misleading. Many were not fully informed about the risk involved or the fact that their children would be intentionally infected with hepatitis. Another issue is there's an exploitation of vulnerable populations. So the participants were children with severe intellectual and developmental disabilities. So they are unable to consent or advocate for themselves. So the study exploited the institutionalized nature of the children, who were already living in poor conditions and were further subjected to medical experimentation. Another key issue is the deliberate infection. So children were deliberately infected with hepatitis, a potentially harmful virus, to study the disease's progression. This act of intentionally causing harm to subjects is a clear violation of ethical standards. The risks to the children were significant, and the benefits were questionable, especially since many of the participants did not directly benefit from the study. There's also a lack of scientific necessity. The study was justified by the researchers on the grounds that hepatitis was already prevalent at Willowbrook, but this rationale does not justify the intentional infection of children. The scientific necessity of such a study was and remains highly questionable. Other, less harmful research methods could have been employed to study with hepatitis without deliberately infecting children. So for the violations of the study to each research principles, first, the study violated the principle of autonomy. So autonomy refers to the right of individuals to make informed decisions about their participations in research. In the Willowbrook study, the principle of autonomy was grossly violated. Parents were often coerced or manipulated into giving consent, and the children themselves were incapable of providing informed consent due to their disabilities were not able to exercise their autonomy. The consent process did not fully inform parents of the nature of the study, including the fact that their children would be deliberately infected with hepatitis. The lack of genuine informed consent disregarded the autonomy of both the parents and the children. There's, the study also violated the principle of beneficence. Beneficence requires that researchers maximize the potential benefits and minimize potential harm to participants. In the Willowbrook study, the researchers failed to uphold this principle by intentionally exposing children to a harmful virus, which could result in a serious health complications. The study offered no direct therapeutic benefit to the participants who were already vulnerable due to their disabilities. The primary aim was to advance scientific knowledge, not to benefit the children involved, which contradicts the principle of beneficence. Another violation is uh, the violation on the principle of non-maleficence. So non-maleficence means do no harm. So this principle was violated in the most fundamental way, as the study deliberately caused harm by exposing children to hepatitis, a serious and potentially deadly disease. The researchers knowingly inflicted harm on the children for the sake of the study. The risks were significant, and the children suffered from disease's effects, violating the ethical obligation to avoid causing harm. The study also violated the principle of justice. So the principle of justice requires that the benefits and burdens of research be distributed fairly. So the Willowbrook study violated this principle by targeting a highly vulnerable population, children with intellectual disabilities, who were not in a position to refuse participation or fully understand the risk. So integrity and another research violation or another violation in the research is on the principle of integrity. Integrity in research demands honesty, transparency, and adherence to ethical standards. The Willowbrook study lacked integrity as it involved deception, coercion, and the exploitation of vulnerable individuals. There's also a violation on the principle of accountability. Accountability involves taking responsibility for the ethical conduct of research and ensuring that all actions are justifiable. In the Willowbrook study, researchers failed to be accountable for the harm caused to the children and the ethical breaches involved in the study. The study proceeded with minimal oversight, and there was a little to no accountability for the researchers' actions. The ethical violations were only addressed after public exposure, indicating a severe lack of responsibility in the study's conduct. There is also a violation on the principle of confidentiality. Confidentiality requires that researchers protect the privacy of participants and their personal information. While this excuse me, while the specific breaches of confidentiality are less documented in the Willowbrook case, the overall handling of the participants suggests a disregard for their privacy and dignity. So the study took place in an environment where the children's dignity and privacy were routinely compromised, and the nature of the institution and the lack of proper care for the participants indicate that confidentiality and respect for their personal integrity were not prioritized. So that's all for my presentation. Here's my references. Thank you for listening.